How you doing?
Hey, Dr. Wynn.
Hi. Sorry to push the lab out late. I wrote 3 versions of the lab.
Oh, goodness.
Oh yeah. I was trying to test it with the never mind. I'll explain it a little bit. So hopefully people are able to join us because
Dr. Wynn, I had to leave about halfway through the lecture, but I have the lecture on my phone, so I'll still be on attending.
okay, that's fine. We can we can probably touch base with stuff later on if you need to, or you can watch the video. Okay.
I actually made a YouTube video to install virtual machines for people.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I was going to go through that process today.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's fine. You can post it too and share it with everyone. Okay, so I will see you at 4:30. I do have another call at 4, so I'm going to try to wrap it up at 4, and then hi Patrick, and then we will we will go over your Pexpect, but I wanted to touch base with everybody today regarding Linux virtual machines. Yay. Okay, so I wrote 3 iteration of the lab, and you know how long that takes to test all of these elements, take screen capture, put everything in. So I was almost done with the GNS3 lab. I decided that I wanted to come back to it only because I want to find out from you what processor or system you're using. It's important that we know about that because GNS3, in order for it to work effectively, you have to run nested virtual machine. And nested virtual machine only works with some of the more recent AMD and Intel. So if you have a legacy processor, I'm talking like i5 older generation, or even, so they just started supporting nested virtual machine with the i7 or Intel processor. So thanks, Chris. So Chris dropped in the virtual machine. So anyway, long story short, before you leave today, I like for you to put in the chat what processor you're using on your system, or if you're using an iOS or a MacBook or an iMac, that's fine. I think that will work okay because we're able to virtualize it. I'm only concerned that, you won't be able to do the exercises and it just defeat the whole purpose. So what I did was I wrote a 3rd iteration of the lab using Linux virtual machine, and we're going to SSH because you mentioned to me that some of you are doing IoT Raspberry Pi. So I said, well, what a perfect opportunity to teach you how to do this and make sure that it works for you. Okay. And once you know this, you can SSH into your Linux servers on AWS Educate. You can do all kinds of really cool stuff. So I had just pushed the document out just like a few minutes ago. I'm sorry for the delay. I was trying to troubleshoot some of the things that comes with it. So anyway, so there are only 2 exercises that we're going to be doing. Okay. And I'm going to adjust the due date. So I'm going to probably make it due by next Monday. So it gives you time to kind of go through, because when you work with Linux, sometimes, everything looks good on the tutorial and the video. And then when you test it, it's like not working. And it's like that for everything in IT, right? So what I wanted to do is to briefly walk you through, and Chris had posted a video on how to make virtual machines, but I wanted to touch on VBox because VBox is compatible with Apple, but however, if you already know this and you learned this in my other classes, this is just a review for you. So I'm just going to do a quick run through with you. But for the demo, I'm going to use VMware Workstation Player only because I amped it up to like 4 gig of RAM and it just runs much smoother. So let's go into screen share and let's talk about the lab. So here's the lab. I will link some additional tutorial videos for you. I have a list of it. I just haven't had a chance to embed it into the page. It takes a little bit of time for me to get each of the embedded things to load on here on Canvas. So you are going to be doing the version 2 of the lab, or actually the 3rd iteration. And I wanted to explain some of this to you first, okay? Let me minimize the people. So don't forget to look at your system information and put in the chat before you leave today. I wanted to get a poll of it so that way when I write the lab, it helps me understand what you're using. So I can make sure that it's, accessible for everyone. So in this lab, we're going to write automation script using Pexpect module and a Paramiko. And I want you to look at chapter 2 in the text or the notes. That's going to help you. Also look at the documentation. And we are going to use Linux virtual machine. So it gives you, at least if you haven't done it before, an introduction. But Patrick, Chris, some of the students in my class now that they took my class before, they're familiar with some of the Linux, but it's always a good practice just to use this. And in IT administration, a lot of the times you would require to use Linux systems, so it's good for us to learn how to do that. I put some notes at the beginning that we need to set up the Linux virtual machine. It would be, you can, if you don't have a lot of storage on your computer, consider getting like a, 32 gig flash drive or an external hard drive and store it on there. That way you can transport it to any system that you need to. It's portable. Or if you have a second drive, you can push it on there. So I provided a link on how to set up Ubuntu because Ubuntu is, it's common, it's easy, you can find a lot of help with it. If you prefer to use a rare release, just keep in mind that some of the tools might not work with it, and but across the board. So I tested this lab using Ubuntu, and then I tested this lab using Fedora. And I found that Ubuntu works much better with it, only because, some of the tools that are already equipped with the OS. Fedora, it's fine. It's just, it has a lot of the similar component, but sometimes you have to bring in stuff that's not there. So to really successfully log in, and you can use your Raspberry Pi for this too. And what you can do is you can use the same virtual machine or the same system, okay? So what we're doing is we're creating a virtual environment, okay? And if you're using your Raspberry Pi, you have to enable SSH on it, and then to be able to connect to it. And there were questions last time that if you're using an uncommon port, Michelle asked, what would you do? You need to go to your wireless router and port forward. So you need to say port 22 is going to be equal to this. And then that way, and then when you configure SSH on your system, you have to say what port it is that you're using. So it is a little bit more complex than just using port 22, which is used for SSH. And why do we care about SSH? Well, you can remotely access a system. Let's say you're working from home and you need to, reconfigure the Linux server or a Linux system. You can do that. Okay. So what we will do is we are going to test it. And when you test it, just keep in mind that you are using the virtual machine or the system IP address. So it's important that you make note of that. So we're connecting to our own system at this point. And then make sure that you include this in your script. Okay. And then also you are going to need to install OpenSSH server. So what we're doing is we are going to make it a system where we can connect to it. I'm connecting to itself, basically. So that way, and after that, you can make other virtual machine and connect to it as long as you point to the destination once it's already been able. So the takeaway from this is 3 things. Number 1, make sure that SSH is enabled. Number 2, in your script, you have to customize your script to the IP address and the password that you're using. Number 3, making sure that your system is connecting and you can ping that. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of this process. I put a lot of different resources for you here, so if you don't know how to use terminal, you can start looking up some of these links and then follow the instructions on these links. And then within the terminal, I want you to learn how to use Vim. If you took my Java class, I do a lot of command line with text editor. That's my deal, right? So, and learn how to do that, because companies are not going to have IDE for you to use, or they might not support that. So you can simply use an editor like a VI editor and just, write your script. So this is like what administrators do. So I want to make sure you know how to do that. When you get to the second one, you need to remember the text talk about installing Paramiko. And if you read the documentation, you need to install Paramiko and cryptography, because Paramiko uses RSA key or SSH utilize RSA key. So you want to be able to initialize the RSA first and then write the script to be able to set that through. So, okay, so what I did was I gave you a scenario, and feel free to put in your own IP address and your username and, your password. That's just, so the default user on the Raspberry Pi is Pi, and the default password is Raspberry. But feel free to edit that in your script. Okay. So when you're done, I want you to take screenshot of your script, either in VI, or you can in Vim, or you can put, and if you put it into the IDE, please take a screenshot of that for me. And then I want you to show me that it's successfully connected. Okay. Any question? Okay. So the first part is I want to show you how
I'm
you
sorry.
can set. Yes.
Did you want us to statically configure that IP address?
No.
Oh, it's just whatever the, okay, sorry.
I'll show you how to do this. So yeah, because if you statically assign an IP and if there's a conflict in IP, it's not going to work. You can, Michelle, right? But just for the convenience of the lab, you don't have to reconfigure stuff every time. But if you wish to, you can. Okay, as long as you don't use that IP address for something else. Okay. So let's start with Virtualbox. Okay. And here is Virtualbox. And Virtualbox is a hypervisor. And it's important that you kind of look at the requirement before you install the type of software. Now, the downside of using Virtualbox is when you create the virtual machine and you use all the default settings, it's going to take up 1 gig of your RAM, which makes your virtual machine slightly slower than usual. And it's about 10 gig of storage virtually, which is it's not very big. It's a few gigs in the actual physical storage. Okay, so keep in mind that you need to have that much space and at least some decent amount of RAM. If you're running on a 4 gig right now in your regular system, it will be slow because your host, which is, you know, Windows or operating system that you're using to access the hypervisor, which is a software that's going to open up the virtual machine. Your host itself is, if you're using 64-bit, it's going to be already roughly about at least 2 to 3 gigs just to run. So if you have more RAM, you're going to see more response. So I just want you to keep in mind. And also your processor, okay, it needs to be like i5 and later for Intel and, you know, some of the later AMD. It needs to support virtualization, okay? And if you wanted to know which one, you can look at the manufacturer information and find out whether your processor supports virtualization or not. And in the older system, you have to go to the BIOS to enable the VT for Intel and, you know, hyper virtualization for AMD. So there, you know, Chris probably have, I don't know if you mentioned that in your video, but if you looked at other videos on YouTube, they also show you
I
how to.
actually didn't. I after I posted it, I remember about that. And not a lot of people have it.
Right.
Don't have it. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're gonna get an error and then you have to start all over again. So just to start right off the bat, look at your processor, check to see if it supports virtualization. Now, if your processor doesn't support virtualization, and if you need access to a Linux terminal, let me know. I'll set up an account for you on AWS Educate, and I'll send you an invite. AWS, there's a little bit of configuration that goes with it in order to terminal into it, but you can have access to the Ubuntu server on AWS and you can have at it, right? But you have 50 credits, and if you use up the 50 credits, that's it. You know, so, and it's time based, you know, it charges you cents to the minutes. So you get a 50 credits to free as a student or as a beginning user. So that will be an option for you, and you need to have internet connection in order to connect to the cloud server. Anyway, so download this. And then once you have this, you would go through the installation and keep it default. That's fine. And VirtualBox can be used for GNS3. And again, your processor is important to, you know, to think about how you wanted to have a nested virtualized environment. That means that we have a virtual machine inside a virtual machine, and, you know, it needs to use modern processor. So once you install it, it would be, you know, a software that you can use. So as you can see, I have set up a lot of different virtual machine previously. Okay, so real quick, if you want to make a new virtual machine, you simply click new. But before you do this, I forgot to mention that you need to download the ISO. Let me get out of this real quick. And I put the link on, you know, from Ubuntu, but if you are not sure, ISO file download. Okay. So if you just need a quick ISO, okay, I recommend using desktop first, and then once you get pretty good at Linux, you can start doing the server one. So here it talks about, you know, the actual physical, and you can also run live USB. So this is the page where you would download the ISO. Okay, I prefer to use the regular ISO instead of the light, only because, you know, I wanted the different feature, but you know, it's pretty close if you look at the comparison in that. The recommended requirements is the same, etc. So once you download it, it would have, I have a Fedora one here. Let me see if I can, it would go into your download folder or the location. Maybe I'll just browse to it. So 2 things to start up VirtualBox. ISO, and then download, right? Install VirtualBox is the third thing. Then when you make it, you simply click new. Now, keep in mind that when you look at the configuration, see how it tells you all of this here? Think of this as your virtual machine, BIOS information. The acceleration, AMD and the VTX, that's basically for virtualization. And 6.1 VirtualBox does support nested virtualization, so you can use this with GNS3. And it's gonna utilize at least 1 gig for your of memory for your virtual machine. And so here it tells you some information about the system, so check that out first. And then I normally put stuff in different folders so I can find it. So here you can browse and then make a folder somewhere, like see how I have Fedora, I have like different, so I like to have a folder where it would have a VirtualBox. So if you wanted to make a new folder, you can simply say Ubuntu, right, CIS30B or something like that. Okay, once you name it, select it. And what that will do is gonna put it in the location. If you wanted to put it on your USB drive, just browse through it. Make a folder. Trust. Okay. All right. So here we can call this Ubuntu class, something like that, right? I don't want to name it Ubuntu again because I already have one. And so we wanted to specify it's, our type of operating system that we're creating, and then go next. And here it's going to recommend at least, so if you want to up the RAM, this is the time. Okay. So we can go to like 2000. I have 16 on mine. So, and then it's going to say that it's going to use the hard drive or the storage. That's going to be about 10 gig. So this is fine. Okay, we're not doing anything crazy heavy duty with this, but if you wanted to scale out, you can up this. So that's fine. We can use that as the default there. So I wanted to keep the default setting, create the hard disk now. Click create. And for VirtualBox, it uses VDI. If you wanted to use it with other hypervisor, then you choose this one. It requires additional tools, but so keep the first option, VDI is fine. Dynamically allocated, that's fine because that's faster than if you wanted to put it in a specific location where it's going to pull from that only. So I normally just keep it and it explains to you what that is. Okay. And then if you wanted to up your storage for your hard drive for this virtual machine, you can increase it. So, I'm fine with 10 gig. Okay. So once you set everything looks good, right? We're going to go ahead and click start. Okay. And it does take a little bit to go. So here is where it's going to ask you for the ISO file that you downloaded, right? I had stored it in the download folder, so I simply can browse to where I had stored the ISO. Ubuntu doesn't require the boot file, so it's already built in with that mechanism, so you can just pull it. Some other Linux OSs, you have to download the file and then use like Rufus or an image creator software to package it. So Fedora is kind of like that. Some of the other releases like that. So you can simply just use the ISO that's provided. And then we can just click start. It's going to do its thing. And then there are times that it's going to ask you to click. So I use all the default stuff only because you know, I don't have to set up like partitions and stuff for the disk. But in my other classes, you know, I showed you guys how to do that with Kali, where you can size your partitions. That's fine. Okay. So it's going to go a few minutes. It's going to go through and it's going to check the disk and things like that. Okay. So once it's done, it's going to boot up. You know, it's going to ask you to create a user account and a password, just like all the other install for the other operating system. Now, if you give it like a lot more RAM, it's going to be a lot faster. If you give it like a gig, it's going to be slower. And also what you're running to, right? And with the VirtualBox, see how my cursor, it's supposed to detect the cursor once it's in there, but sometimes you can press escape to get it out of it. So here is another machine inside my inside my host, which is my Windows environment. And then I also have another one running right now. So any question? Okay. So once you set it up and successfully log in, right? So I'm going to use this one because I already have it up. Okay, give me 1 second, okay? I gotta close out some window here. Okay. All right. So next, what we're gonna do is we are gonna look at how to configure some of this before we get into doing our script. Okay. And please look at the link when you get stuck on something, and you know, if you choose to use another Linux release, just keep in mind that the commands are different across. So, but Debian base, you know, and if you use Raspberry Pi, right, you have to do super user do apt-get install. So when you install packages, because you're not at the highest level of user account, you have to use the command called super user do. So now it's looks like this. You got the browser and everything like that. Now I'm on VMware Player, but on VirtualBox, right? Oh, here, let me go ahead and select install so you can see. You can always go to settings to change your hardware, okay, system, see that? But please do this before you start the virtual machine. Otherwise, you know, if you started it and you change your mind about the configuration, shut it down and then change it, because sometimes you can't reconfigure some of the things there, okay? They disable the root user in the back for most part, unless you configure it to allow root, okay? So I normally don't use root, like you don't use administrator in Windows, you would use other user. So let me finish. So here is, you know, the installation part. We're just gonna select English US. If you want another language, sure, but use English. And then the app, just do a normal installation, download update. So if you wanted to, I normally do the download updates, and you can push updates to terminal also, okay? So after you select all of this, it's gonna get going, it's gonna go. Okay, so now I'm in another virtual machine, which is also Ubuntu. You can, you know, be familiarize yourself with where everything is at. So this is like, you know, the file manager in Windows environment is just almost the same. Unlike Windows, it's gonna put stuff in home a lot. As you can see, there's my Python file. So, or you can specify which folder you wanted to put it in. So kind of similar to what you've seen in Apple environment. So, but anyway, what we want is we want to use our terminal. If you don't see it pinned here, you're going to click on show applications. And if it's not here, you can search for it. Okay. And then it's going to be this icon. So here's my Paramiko one, but you can always make a new tab. Okay. And I configure it to be bigger so I can demo it for you. However, if it's not to your liking, you can always click this button right here. Let me move my Zoom thing, and then go to preferences. And so this is like intro to Linux terminal as well. So you can change your preferences and then check out, you can create a profile. So I'm using a certain profile right now where it's going to be, you know, larger in font, whatever you like. Okay, so to start our lab, the best thing to do is to start looking at IP addresses, okay? And now when you issue the command ifconfig like this, the first time that you use your Ubuntu virtual machine, it's gonna tell you that you can't use this. It doesn't have the net tools, okay? But I already installed my net tools and I'm gonna show you how to do that. So here is the network address, the IP address, okay? And it's subnet mask, okay? And, you know, etc. Okay, so there's some additional information like the MAC address and the inet6. So what you wanted to do is you can do sudo apt get install, right? Tools. I think this is how they spell it. Yeah, so then you're gonna type in the password that you use to log in. And, you know, if you mistype, then it's going to give you an error, you know, the same prompt, and then you're going to type it again. Okay. So once it's installed, then you can do ifconfig. Okay. And then find out your IP address. Okay. That's important because when we SSH, we're going to use that IP address. Okay, that system IP address itself is an SSH server. Now, before you can run SSH, you have to install Open Ssh. Okay, and
Doesn't
you
it commonly switch IP address?
Yeah, if you dynamically assign, so the next time you log in, it might change. Mine hasn't changed since yesterday. There's a lease on the router. Usually it's default to like 30 days.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So check out your IP address first. If you want to use static IP, fine, right? You have to, you know, find out how you be able to set up the static IP. This is not a networking class for Linux. I wanted to just to give you a brief overview so you can get your script working. Okay, so now like you can check out if SSH is installed or not. I put a link on there for you on how to check your status for SSH, but I recommend installing SSH. So what we would need to do is we would have super user do install, right? Open SSH server. Okay, so we gotta get everything going. We have to install all of these packages. The cool thing about Linux and terminal is it's gonna pull all of this. You don't have to go to a website, find where you can download it, just pull from Git. So awesome, right? Then what we can do is we need to see if SSH works, right? So before you write your script, you have to know the process of what you're trying to automate, and you have to go through that process. I recommend that for everything for the network. if you wanted to configure the router and automate that process, you have to know what prompt is it asking you at which steps and what you should enter. So we're going to do an SSH at the IP address 192.168.17.129. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot my username. So SSH username. So very much like what we've seen in, I think I typed my password wrong there. Okay. All right, so it works. So after you install your Open SSH server, right? You're gonna get it going, and then you're gonna try to see if your SSH is working. It's gonna ask you for your password, and then it's gonna say, oh, okay, if everything works. It might ask you, I did this yesterday, so when I tested it, so I already enabled like,
Professor,
you know, yes.
I got a workaround without having to find your IP address. So you type in SSH, then the name of your user dash Virtualbox,
Mhm.
and then or whatever if you type in
Your
host
host name,
yeah.
name. Yeah.
So it's just you just SSH into your host name, and that way you never have to.
That's if you NAT. You gotta be careful doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, so network address translation takes the IP and translate it back to the host name. If you don't NAT, you're gonna have issue. Okay. And what do I mean by that? So I'm using VMware Player, and it's similar on the VirtualBox. So when you manage your settings on your virtual machine, the default setting is for your network adapter is NAT out of the box when you create your virtual machine. So what it does is it's going to share my host, my Windows PC IP with the actual virtual machine. Now, if you don't NAT and you bridge, it's a different story. Then so it's a good way to use host name sometimes. And when you script, you can use host name in your script. But so I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you the script on
If
how.
you're using a Raspberry Pi to setting it up, it might not actually register the IP address and the host name.
Right.
So you'll have issues that way as well.
Right. So because Raspberry Pi is the way it's designed, it is not it has Jessie, but it doesn't have like the full feature like what you've seen in other Linux systems. That's a good point. Okay. So what I do is I just use an IP address because IP address is unique, it's easy, and you can put that into your script. Now, okay, so I understand that with the SSH, when you SSH it, it's gonna ask you for a password, right? See this right here? And then after that, if you authenticate, it's just gonna log you in. So we're good. Okay, so think about that process. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use VI to create script now. Okay, and you can you can do Python 3. So before we do that, we need to install Pexpect. Okay, so sudo apt-get install Pexpect. Okay, and then is it not able to locate packages for me now? Let's try that. Ah, son of a gun, unable to peg. It worked yesterday. Let me see. Did you guys put something in there? Thank you for that. I don't think, let me try this. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put the install. Expect. I gotta make sure I type that correctly. Okay, thank you. So that works. Yes, to continue. So we had previously put in sudo apt-get install pexpect, and it can't find it, so you have to say it's python-pexpect. And you can look at also the documentation for that. Okay, so now what we did was we install it, then it's done. So when you work with Parameco, you have to also install Parameco. And then what you're going to do next is you are going to use Vim. And to make a new script, I'm just going to say this lab2 ex1.py. Okay, so you are changing from the terminal, which is a command line, now into the editor. So it tells you that it's a new file. So from the terminal, we can just switch to the editor and we can write our script. And you can do this for Java. You can do this for other languages as well, right?
It's asking us to install Vim on our end.
Yeah, you need to install Vim. I recommend you install Vim. So sudo apt-get install vim. And the package is not that big. So, and once you install it, it gives you the little prompt at the beginning. It's going to say, you know, Q to quit, you know, some of those things. So I also put a link for your Vim Basics. So in here is where you write your script. You would have to press the insert key on your keyboard to start writing. Okay. Then you would have the insert mode. So we can put in comments, right? Automate login to SSH. Okay, you can put whatever you like, or most people, they would put where that folder, where that file is located, stuff like that. So now we can say import pexpect. Okay, that's all we need for this one. And then you can start defining your, and you can call this child, you can call it C, but we're just gonna follow a lot of the example. So we need to have a pexpect dot spawn, right? And here is where we would have SSH, and then I would put in my username and then my IP address. And then next we are gonna now do a login, and we're gonna have to .expect. We're gonna set up the expect method. And then here is where, think about the login process, right? What is the first step, right? What, you know, so from my end, so I'm going to pull this up for you so you can see without having to let you wait. Okay, so you import pexpect, you're going to spawn, right? And this only works in Linux, like what we talked about before. then it's going to expect a password. Now you can use the symbols and all of that. So if I do something like dot asterisk, it's just going to say that there might be one or more characters. So if you use regular expression, you know, characters in this, be careful with that, because it might, if it's not able to detect stuff, it's going to throw the error and then you have to go back and fix it. So I found that just password like this works. And then you can just put in whatever password that you need to log in. Okay. And then after that, we would have the username at, okay. And then, like I said, this is more than one character. And in Linux terminal, let me open another tab so you can see. You see how there's a tilde and a $sign? Okay. So this is why we put some of this stuff in here. So whatever expectation that you would have to what you would see at a certain step, then you would put in those characters. Okay. Yes, you can use Nano. Perfectly fine with Nano. Thanks, Patrick. So Patrick asked if he can use Nano. Yes, you can. And Nano is a text editor. You can use that. Many of my students use Nano. Okay. Now, when you get to this part, right, what you're doing is now you authenticate, and then you are going to expect, you know, the next part is with the terminal, and then it's going to ask for some kind of information. So you need to put in host name, right, which ultimately is tied to this system. Okay. And you also need to have a new line, because after it registered the host name, what it's going to do, it's going to drop it to the new line. So once you have that, we're going to go ahead and print, right, before with using the before property. But if you want confirmation, you can do a print like done. So you know that it's already gone through that, because, you know, we want some confirmation or finish or next step or whatever, right? And then from after that, what you're going to do is you are going to have another expect method, and then you're going to tell it to exit. That means we're going to get out of it. Okay. So, and that will be it. So basically we logged into it. Okay. We automate the login process, and then we get out of it. But if you want anything else, like obtain file, you know, because you use SSH to connect to this system, if you need to drop a file in there, you have to write a method to write a text file, let's just say, and then you got to point it to the path of the folder where that file is going to be stored. Okay. There's a lot of different resources online you can find on how to do stuff with this. But for the lab requirement, I only want you to automate the login process and then exit out of it. Okay, any question? So I wrote one yesterday. Okay, so once I finish, right, let's say I finish this file. If you wanted to save, there are different commands in Vim for this. So right now you're editing it, right? And then when you finish, you just press escape on your keyboard, and then you can do a :W to write. That means you're going to save, and then press enter. So what that will do is just going to add whatever. So if you need to leave it halfway like this, can come back to it. You can reopen it by doing like a Vim, what is that, L2 ex1.py. Well, I have it open still, but you can come back to it and be able to do that. And you can open as many terminal as you need to using new tab. Right click and then new tab. Okay. So let's see if my script from yesterday worked. 2.py. Okay, so here is password information, right? My spawn. And what I did was I added some of this. I don't need all the other characters because when I looked at the terminal, there was only the tilde. So I only added the tilde there. And then I put the sendline host name, carriage, print child before, print done. Also, I expect the same thing as this right here, and I tell it to exit. Okay. Are we okay with this? Just like what we did before, but I just used less character in this right here. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to run it. Python 3 test2.py. See, worked. Yay. Any question? So there are required processes in that, and I will find some additional tutorial video. I wanted to add FTP onto your exercise too, but yesterday when I was working on it, I couldn't find any FTP server that was that didn't time me out. It was timing me out left and right. So I connected to it, but it didn't let me navigate through it through the terminal. So any question?
If the keys are already set up so that you don't have to enter a password, is that gonna mess up the script?
You have to modify your script.
But you want us to do it exactly like this?
No, do it how your system is gonna be. So, if you already set up your RSA key, then you just need to have a different expect method, right? You would have the next one, which is going to be the host name, and you can write additional to that, because the whole point in this exercise is to teach you how to connect, right? Automate the login for SSH. And then if you want to expand your script and do things once you terminal into that system, that will be great, right? Like, reconfigure some of the things, drop files in there. There are a lot of different things that you can do. Basically, you're just going to have to add you can write another module and then call the method from another module, just like what we did with the CIS30B, and be able to do that. The reason why I suggest that is you can write a module for, creating certain type of files and then reuse it over time, just calling the method. Okay, but you don't have to do it exactly like this. I wanted to demo it on how I did this, so that way you can see the process behind it. Any question? Okay, so that was
I got a quick one. So
sure.
if we did the Vim, where is those files getting saved?
Home
Okay.
by default. But if you wanted to save it to a certain path, then you can have it set up to that path. I like to put it there only because it's connected to everything. You don't have to CD, you don't have to change directory to other folder, but you can create a folder and then CD to it, change directory to it.
Okay.
Okay. And in Linux, I know that many of you know how to use terminal, but in Linux, you can always use the help feature to get some of the basic commands. you know, and you will love it. It's way easier than just like clicking 5 screen to get to something. Okay. And you can keep opening, you know, you can make multiple files at the same time and then go to terminal to test it real quick. So you don't have to run any IDE on it. Okay. And since we're using Python 3, remember that we need to use the command because it does support Python 2.7 where it's just Python. All right. Any question? So let's come back to this right here, my Virtualbox. And then let's see, erase and install, no detected. Okay, so it's doing its thing. It's creating the partition. It's writing stuff. It's, you know, and this might give yourself like a good, depending on your system, 20-30 minutes or at the most. So I'm going to use a different username. And then you can specify your computer name, which is your host name, right? We can call this UB1. And then your password. And if you have time, then you can make multiple virtual machines, set it up, and, you know, just because it's going to cut. But however, right, if you're sharing machines, then you're sharing the IP, then you got to be careful with that. So think about how these systems are communicating. I had put one of the other one on I tested yesterday using a different subnet, right? It was connecting, but then it times out a little bit for me. So you can try to automate it and see if it connect to another virtual machine. That will be fun to do. Okay. All right. So while that's set up, let's talk about the second one. So on this one, what you need to do is you are going to write the script using Parameco module. And remember that there's dependency with Parameco in that you have to have cryptography. And in order for it to work, you have to install the key. Michelle asked earlier, she already have the key. So you have to install the key. And then once you install the key, then you can run that script because it doesn't have the automation piece to that. I know that you can tie in NetMiko to reduce some of the processes, but I didn't require NetMiko for this lab. So you can do the same thing. So you need to set up the RSA key, and I put a link on how you would need to set that up. And then remember at the top, I put that you need to make sure that you install, and you would, for Ubuntu, you can do sudo apt-get install python 3-Parameco, okay, or python-Parameco, okay. And then
Sure.
you need, yes.
So for some reason, there was a bug when we did the keys with RSA, and so we had to switch to the ECDSA. I take it that won't make a difference.
I don't think so. Yeah, if it supports it in the SSH, then that should be okay. So if you're having issues with the RSA key, then what you can do is you can, you know, see what other type of keys is supported. Now, so for Windows, when you use this in the Windows environment, you know, you can use PowerShell and be able to set up the keys, and you can automate some of this in the Windows settings as well. But because our script is using a specific module that's only supported in Linux, this is why I wanted to see if you can test it with the Linux virtual machines. Okay. And you probably saw a little bit of the snapshot earlier. I didn't get fully to test my script, but here. So it would look something like this. It's actually pretty short. Okay. Then, so here you have the Paramiko, and I'm in Vim, right? And then you have cryptography. Once you install it, remember to install it first. And then I declare SSH client. And then because it's using this method from Parameco module, kind of like Pexpect, right? You would do that. And then we would set the key and do the auto policy. If it gives you a hard time, you have to update the policy and enable. I'll show you how that's done. So make sure that your host name match up, right? I think my host name is wrong here, but you can look that up as well. Just it is Ubuntu. Okay. And then your username and then your password. Okay. So if you wanted anything else to print in confirmation or to do something else, then you can add it into the script when you're done, right? Get out of the insert mode by pressing escape key and do a write, which is :W. And if you wanted to close it, that would be :WQ or Q exclamation. If you do like, let me see here. See how it's in insert mode? You can escape. And then if you type in : see how it's on the bottom right here, right? You can have it write or write quit or quit, etc. I normally just have it right so that way I can still edit it. And then I just open a new tab to run it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the areas that you can troubleshoot with Parameco. And you will run into some of the issues. You heard Michelle for earlier, right? You can generate the RSA key, and there's a link already on your document, so you can do an SSH keychain TRSA, and then to be able to obtain the key pair. I was able to do this earlier, so if you leave it blank, what's going to happen is I recommend giving it a file name so you know what you call it. Otherwise, you're going to have to find out. See how on this command, they generated the RSA key pair, and it's going to put it into the home username SSH, and it's under ID RSA. If you give it a name like my key, like this, then you can use my key and then username at your IP address. Okay, so the .org here, replace that with your IP address. If you don't give it a name, you have to figure out what it used as a default name. Okay, so make sure that we give it a name here, and that might be the issues that you're running into. After that, you are going to access the SSH directory, and then you are going to look for the keys. Yeah, I'm running low on my C drive. I gotta start deleting some stuff there. But I have a large D drive, so I gotta move some stuff over. Okay. And also on this page, it tells you how you can install Paramiko, but remember that it's using SCP in this exercise that they're showing here. And so you can look at the tutorial that I provided for you. Now, the way that they write this is that they would write a config file, and you can test it this way too. Okay, where you define the host, the user, the key path, but just make sure that it matches up to yours. And then you can make a client. So this one definitely gives you more resources compared to, what you've seen in the actual textbook or the notes. So here's the client script. See how you have the auto add policy and the RSA key. These are the methods that were already built into Paramiko. And what this will do is gonna add to the rules, and then also this is gonna pull the RSA key. This is gonna catch the exception for authentication and also SSH exception. Sometimes you get a timeout exception. Otherwise, you have to manually catch it. Okay. And if you learn how to write class, right, you remember from CIS30A, here basically they just create a remote client class and then defining the members for, or one of the members for that class. Okay, so you can eventually call that method. Okay. So mine was I just require you to log in, but remember that at this time, when we're using SSH, we're doing client and server. And when you're using that same system, you're basically treating it as a client, right? Which is where you run the script and then you also connecting to it as a server. Otherwise, you would have to do the server automated script on the server on another virtual machine, and then the client on, another script for the client. Now, if you do test it that way, I highly recommend that you make sure that you're on the same subnet. Otherwise, you got to make sure that there's nothing blocking through the router and other software tools that you have in your network. Okay. Because if you have a firewall, it's going to kick it. Okay. Let's see. So this walks you through some of the additional resources, and I think it's good if you wanted to practice this and not kind of build out some of the skills on how to catch some of the exception with the remote host. Because as you know, with COVID-19, the majority of the IT professionals work from home, and you do service some stuff with data center and stuff like that. But usually it's only like physical installation, have to go there and actually reboot stuff. So if we can automate this, we can do this and terminal in and just submit the script and be done with. So, okay. So for number 2, I simply want you to set it up where you can log in, and if you wanted to do anything extra to that, more power to you. Okay, and I also need screen capture for the script and the output in through your terminal. Okay, what I'll do is I will test my script, and then if I get a chance, I will add another video, and then I will link it to your video page on Canvas. Just kind of give you some basic tutorial with it. I think I have to adjust some of the things in here. And so also, so I'll add more to this file and then I'll test it. Okay. Yes.
Is it simply that you can just make a copy of your keys and then just, paste it on another Linux device and you can already like authenticate? Is it like that simple?
You can copy the key and then you can transfer that key, but also it pertains to your host name. If you have different configuration for your host name, it might create issues. But yes, you can copy some of the identity. Ideally, not a good practice. So I would recommend generating keys for different systems because you might have issues with one system and reusing the same key establish the session. Then it would have some vulnerability behind that. But yes, you can copy the key and be able to test it across.
Okay.
Yeah, there are commands on how to copy the RSA ID. Okay. So this gives you a little bit more than networking. It actually goes into security a little bit, but we'll for the security class, which is the next one, there are elements to that doesn't just cover networking. So, and I think, from a developer standpoint, some of you are getting more into like the computer science side, taking this class. You see this with, from the development end too, right? Like for single sign-on, be able to establish that secure session for connection. And then you can play with like other services like FTP and things like that. So I was combing through like 20 different websites early this morning or late for you guys were sleeping already, but I couldn't get things to not time out for me and I was a little bit upset. But my husband came down and he was like, you need to go to sleep. Otherwise you're not gonna like, you're too tired to remember all the things that you need to do. So, which I did. Okay. I will check on my, oh yeah. So I'm running out of this space here, but anyways, so let's say that you want to get rid of the virtual machines. You can just simply go to the folder. And then you can just delete it, right click and delete it. And then it'll take care of that. Okay. And if you already have, Linux system on a computer, like if you have an old computer, install Linux on it, use it. Yeah, I know that there are not a lot of, extensive amount of software that's supported, but it's been pretty good with, some of the Linux releases. So that's pretty much, yes, question?
So if you had 5 Pis, you would recommend having different keys for each one?
Yes, because because you might, the point in having different system is to be able to simultaneously accessing things at different things. And if you wanted like a centralized environment by connecting the 5 Pis and getting 5 keys, then you should just have a server releasing the keys, to centralize it. But that's just, my perspective on it. If you have 5 Pis, then what you can do is you can set up where, one system is going to manage all the 5 Pis. And then that system, if you wanted to copy it that way, then that system would have, one Pi is going to have an ID. And then you can just connect to that Pi every single time from number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then take the key, instead of just storing it, because Raspberry Pi is also limited in storage too, right? You got what the most you can go is based on your SD capacity. So if you wanted to copy then generate on one, which is the main one, that's going to be your server, and then distribute it. And that would be more of like a centralized client server environment that you would use from. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, I like having authentications and the key issue for the individual system so you can log it better, Michelle. Then, you know, and be able to really identify like what kind of session was established for that session or for that system at that point in time. So security measures a little bit better individually, but the downside of that is the resource utilization for each one of them. Okay. And then I think I don't have anything else for you besides that. So let's see, you using some. So for your Intel, I like to know like which version of Intel, if you can give me that. And if you don't have it now, you can email it to me. So I see some i5. The reason why is when I write the GNS lab, I want to make sure that you can nest VMs. Okay. Well, I have some time. So you want to talk about GNS 3? Okay, let's talk about that. Because I want to come back to it and get you guys to get simulation working. So you can use GNS3 with the Virtualbox. I recommend using the VM. Okay. Because if you only use the local system, it's going to be very limited. And when you trying to run like routers and simulate that, it's going to be harder. So this is the environment. Okay. You have a GNS virtual machine and you're going to add the appliances to it. Once you do that, you're going to run the operating system for those appliances, terminal, right? CLI. So what will happen is it's going to become a virtual machine inside another virtual machine, the GNS3 VM, and then the appliance OS, which is virtual inside that VM. So now the hypervisor that's able to, you know, I know that like VMware Workstation Player does not support nested. You have to go with the Pro, or if you use vFusion for Apple, it works. Okay. So I came across that 6.1 for VirtualBox does support nested VMs. So you just got to make sure that you check that option, right? You check this option right here in the system. Where you would need to go to processor and you need to check this option before it launch. Okay. Now, if it doesn't give you that, that means that it's not able to support it with the processor that you have, that it sees. Okay. So with that said, so there are two things that you need to really download. Number one, that's going to be your GNS3 desktop. Okay. Number two is GNS3 VM in order to get a full network established. And I show you some of this already. Okay. So this is the desktop, right? So what will happen is when you wanted to simulate a full network environment, you open up your desktop and then you also need to.
I don't think you're sharing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. See, sometimes I get carried away and I just like talk. All right, so you would open up your desktop application and then See how it tells you on the right here, which is desktop. And then you also need to run the virtual machine that you downloaded from GNS3. They have different version of it. So what that will do is it's going to service the need for the desktop application. So you're taking a software and you're going to use that software with the virtual machine, which is going to be, the back environment where it's going to support, some of the appliances. So right off the bat, it's going to ask you to create a new project. So let's just call this P1. Okay. And when you run your virtual machine, you simply, let me see if I can find. You simply launch that. So right now I have 3 running, right? So before you run it, you want to make sure that you go through and you check out the options, and here is where you would be able to set it up. Okay, let's see. We're going to go ahead and import it. Did I lose my VDI file? It's there. I'm on an 8 core, so it should be fine. What the heck is going on? Anyway, I don't know. It's giving me some kind of, maybe the file's corrupted. There's a lock. Let me check. There's no lock on this. Sometimes if you see like an LCK file, what that does is it's not paused correctly. Anyway.
Question about
Sure.
for the command SSH-keygen, if I running that in Windows, the PowerShell, every time I run that, does it know that I'm making new keys, or is it referring to the old key that I already made?
It's, if you only run that command, it's going to refer to the only key that it would have, which is it, because it's going to go to that default storage.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have a different key, then you would have to identify what that key is. But that just to generate a key. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so that would just generate the key. So what will happen is you can add the appliances. I had downloaded a couple of the Cisco switches and router. If you wanted to know where, you can find Marketplace on GNS3, and there are tons. That's legacy, but it's good. Okay. And you can look for, let me see. So if you search for Cisco iOS appliances, or this is basically, it's an image of that particular switch or router, or it's not all just Cisco. You can also have like Windows to simulate Windows. So with the virtual machine, you can simulate like a server in your network, along with other appliances, including some of the security appliances. Okay. So I would start, don't download a bunch of stuff, right? Just the ones that you need. or if you want to. So I would download this one, VL2. And then if you want some other ones, you can look for the ones that you would need. So once you have it, then what you would do is you would be able to bring it in by importing in your devices. Now, this is the device that it comes with is pretty limited, but in order to get things to work properly, you have to have NAT, you should have a switch, you should have like PC connecting to the switch, and then you can add the router and connect the router to the switch. And remember what I showed you, right? When you link it, you're gonna go from one port to another port. And then once you finish linking everything, then you can, click the start all the appliances, and it shows green and it works. Okay. So it tells you the topology nodes here, and then if you have additional virtual machine or servers, they will tell you here. So you can simply write the script, but you have to, if in order for that to work, then you need to be able to import it in and get it to work. Now, GNS3 also work with AWS, and it works with, the popular cloud environment, because it's designed for network administrator and security administrator to test for DevOps too. So what you can do is you can also test it on cloud if you don't want it to run something like this, virtually. Okay, so I'll finish writing out some of the lab and then looking into AWS option for you for future references. So that way, if you need to, you know how to do it. Okay. Any question? Okay.
I got, so I don't have that much storage space, so I'm racking up thinking about like try to have the using an external like storage, probably like I think I may just go and buy an SSD to run the VM.
You don't need SSD, but if you can buy an SSD, that will be great. You can just buy like a good size USB or an external hard drive. You can use regular HDD external hard drive. A lot of the cheaper ones that you see $40, $50 for 2 terabyte, those are they are not fully flash technology, right? You know that some of them are spin-based HDD still. But yeah, if you can do that, I would say like a 32 gigs would give you maybe a few virtual machines. If you can go higher than 32 gigs on a USB flash drive, and it supports USB 3 for most part, and then I have this one is a USB 2. And when I first learned virtual machine, we were way back, like at least a decade and a half ago that I started using virtual machine. But we would always put it on external drive, so that way you can use it in different system. And so that way it's not going to impact your C drive. Like I have a lot of stuff now on my C. My C is actually a lot smaller than my D, so I have to move stuff to my D drive regularly. And you should section it that way. You should have a data and an OS where not too much data should be stored with the OS. And then, keep your stuff separately. So in case it crashed, you still have another drive that stores your data. But yeah, that's a good plan.
Okay, so at least just I don't need, so for this class, I don't need that much. So at least 32 for external storage will be enough.
Yeah, and you can always delete it and so maybe a couple virtual machines, 2 to 3, I would say, would be good enough, right? Yeah. And if you can do like a 50 gig or higher, that's a plus for me, but yeah, I think a 32 gig, and then you can transfer it later on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Okay, so I will let you get off earlier if you don't have any questions. I'll stay on for questions, and then I have to jump off at 4 because I have a vendor that's going to meet with me for additional tools that we can purchase for you guys.
Can I see you 4:30 today?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can see me at 4:30 today.
Okay. Okay, I go
Okay.
to see you 4:30 because I didn't start install that, so I couldn't do the homework yet. Okay.
Or for Pexpect?
Yes, and I want to
Okay.
use my Apple computer, so I want to. We do together. We have to check this computer memory, something that is good for that.
That's fine.
Mm.
Okay, I'll see you at 4:30.
Okay. See you at 4:30. Okay.
Okay.
Nico, do you have a new MacBook, the M1?
When did you buy your Apple system? Was like what, a year or two ago, right?
No, it's 2017.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's older, Steve. Yeah.
Okay.
17.
The M1s don't allow virtualization right now.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I didn't. So that was one of the systems that I looked at when I was gonna get another laptop. I did get another laptop and I got a good deal. But yeah, so that was the main decision behind it. Thank you for letting everybody know about
Okay.
that, Steve.
So my 2017 is old, not good for this.
Your laptop is Intel based, so you're fine to do virtualizations. It's the new MacBook M1s that don't allow it.
Yeah, and it uses a
Oh.
new processor, right? Their own processor.
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're into, since I have a little bit of time to talk to you guys about that. I don't know if you're into gaming laptop, but there's affordable brand. I don't know if you heard of Main Gear. So they have the Vector, the Element, and so I just picked up the Element. I think I got the 2, and they just released the 3, which is a few $100s more, but it's the same spec as the Alienware, but it's a lot cheaper. So like it comes with 32 gig of RAM, and you know, if you're looking for graphics, it's good. It's light, it's 17-inch, and it's definitely cheaper than, I don't know, $3,000. But you can look for sales, I think, you know, so
Not
you can,
cheap.
well, the specification behind that is, you know, so you're buying like graphics, and you're buying the processor that comes with it is decent. And so if you compare that to like Asus or Acer gaming system or HP, I compare it to the Omen, and it is slightly cheaper than the Omen or some of the other ones, but you know, just a thought. But I know Micro Center sometime throughout the weeks they have like $400 off on these. So you basically pay about close to $1,000 for something that you would pay, you know, $2,000-$3,000 in the other brand. Okay, well, that's it for me. I'll stay on for a bit to talk about questions. So yeah,
Alright, see you
Siglio
next
is
week.
good. All right, type your name into the chat, please, and have a good weekend. I'll see you next time. Bye. You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Any question? Hi, Steve.
Hello, how are you?
Good. What's going on?
Good. Well, one of I'm an SIS administrator here at the district office in Marina Valley, and unfortunately, my coworker went on stress leave, so I'm
That's fine.
taking over her works
tasks.
and my works as well. So things are a little bit busy right now.
Yeah, you warned me already, so I'm aware. I
Okay,
know
I
that.
just want to
So
make sure. Okay.
yeah, so in any case, you know, if things come up and you can't get through some of the stuff, just shoot me an email. But I'm aware of your situation. You already
Okay.
told me, so that's okay. All right.
Perfect.
I understand.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And you guys have a great day.
All right, take
Bye.
care. Bye.
I guess since no one else seems to need anything, mine's kind of random. I have an old HP that was basically like kind of a not smart buy by one of my family members. That it had low RAM and had a different version of Windows that was it was a Windows 8.1 that is now not getting any security updates and everything. So yeah. And it was back before, and it cost them like $200 or something like that. So they were like, "Okay, great deal." No, I was like, "No, don't do it." Salesman talked them into it anyway. And now it's
Okay.
it's vulnerable. It's kind of worthless to use, in a way. So I was wondering, like, I was planning on turning it into seeing if I can turn it into a Linux host OS.
Sure. Blow it
And I
out.
was wondering if like you ran into any issues with that with like laptops that were basically designed to work in the cloud as far as like they have low storage and
Storage. No, I
low
think
memory.
what you said is good. You can run Linux, just straight Linux, not virtual machine. That's fine.
Hmm.
Linux, you can run on that was because I think the more later OS, there's more interaction with the user, so there is some additional RAM requirement. So you can, and if you really wanted to make it like super light, just
Hmm.
install terminal interface only. That's
Oh
really,
boy.
if you really wanted to get good at command line, then
Hmm.
do. And so a lot, if you download like server, like Ubuntu server, Fedora server, those,
Hmm.
it usually asks you the options. You have, you know, I learned with Red Hat from when before they even had the interface, so it was purely terminal. But
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of these server OSs, it would tell you like you have to install the interface because most of the time people don't use interface for server administration. So if you wanted to really strip it down where it doesn't use a lot of RAM and storage, then just use terminal. Um, but if you do install it with the user interface, you don't have to, you can bring in the packages as you need. You saw that, right, with Linux. So, I
Hmm.
think like even a 10 gig drive, like maybe a 20 gig drive, a couple gigs of RAM would probably be okay. It might not be super fast, like, your powerful gaming system, but it would do its job to test stuff. Sure, you can do
Yeah, I
that.
was thinking if I could use it just for like basic coding, if I was away from my main computer.
Yeah, because all you need is what terminal and maybe like I don't even need anything else outside of that in Linux to tell you the truth. Because, the stuff that we do, we can do everything in terminal already. And then
Hmm.
all the installation that you need is usually just module for programming and maybe tools. So if you wanted to make it into a Kali Linux machine, yeah, there are tool packages that you would need to download or install with it. But and some, but everything can be done through the command line. So yeah, I would suggest making it in blow it out, back up the files, of course, in case
Hmm.
they need it, and then blow it out and make it into a Linux machine. That's a really good way of using an older system.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was gonna try to do because once it gets past the point where they're gonna stop doing security updates, I start getting sketchy about using that laptop anymore.
Yeah, and at least if you browsing on it, like let's say if you put Ubuntu or Mint or something like that
Hmm.
on there, at least you have updates and at least it's secure
Yeah.
and you can install antivirus or anti-malware on it, if you need to.
Oh, that
Um,
reminds me. Can you I noticed it like didn't like Surfshark, and there are some it doesn't like or what?
Yeah, what will happen is you're gonna have software developer that's gonna design it for specific platform, even though it's support in Linux environment, it
Mhm.
might not work with the releases. So it's best to really look at the Linux release you're using and what would be, even though it's cross-platform, sometimes the things will not work accordingly. Yeah,
So
or
look
you might
into
not
it
have.
first before I install it, just in case.
Yes, and anything and any OS.
Well, no, yeah, but I mean like the version number. It actually in this it actually matters because
Well,
lower
yeah,
versions might be
and
more acceptable than the higher one.
I normally I would search stuff in the forum sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because people post stuff in the forum for what to look out for. And I tend to find a lot of the answers that I need, instead of looking around. Yeah, you can just Google it and find it. But a lot of the time, like if you go to that Linux release forum,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of the Q&A is already addressed there. So you can find solutions and answers, and people recommend different tools and things like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I was playing with the virtual machine a little while ago and I got mad at like Surfshark and stuff, trying to install it.
Well, it's not a perfect solution for everything.
No, yeah, it probably just doesn't like it, but that's okay. Because I got the latest Ubuntu 20
Uh-huh.
installed on mine right now for
Yeah.
the VM.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, might
Yeah.
just not like it.
Practice on, well, I usually don't have problem with Ubuntu. But in the case where if you run it into issues, there might be some misconfiguration. But
Maybe.
Ubuntu has always been pretty easy to use.
Mhm.
In the past, I taught Linux using Fedora, which is also free. Fedora is a little different, and yes, you can add all the tools just like all the other releases. Mint is also a good one to use. I know that Patrick is favorable with Arch. And yeah, Arch Linux is used by a lot of developers. In assembly we use Arch assembler. So you would find some preference across, and then security for practice at the low
Linux.
level is Kali.
Okay, Linux. Sorry, my bad. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
I remembered
Parrot,
as the one with the dragon.
yeah,
I
I
like the
think
logo.
it's growing in popularity, but it's a good tool. It's a good OS to use. It comes with a lot of different tools. You might not need all the tools, right? In some cases, but it will be good to kind of learn the tools. Yeah, so if you have Kali, you can make a Kali virtual machine. I think I wrote instruction for that
In 27, yeah, when we took
yeah.
it,
Mhm.
we did
So
both Linux, Kali and Ubuntu.
yeah, so if you already have it
AWS.
somewhere, open it, log in. You don't have to redo it, You might have it somewhere.
I think I might somewhere. I
Okay.
forget. But
All
okay.
right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions from any of you?
Oh wait, one last thing. The CS 200. Can we start and stop it, or does it count as a thing? And
Yeah. So
can we learn multiple days? Is what I'm saying.
when you finish, or I'm saying, let's say you're not finished, you're halfway done when you close it out, it will just allow you to resume into it. But
Okay, good. I
yeah.
wanted to know before I hit it. I don't want to, use up
And
a
then
try or something.
right. And then if you're unhappy with your, the answers that you got, you can click start over and then redo it. And I think you can still, once you start it, it's gonna force you to resume. It's not gonna let you, unless you click start over, and then it's gonna begin from beginning. But they pulled from like so many thousand questions, so you might
Yeah, I
not
think
even
you
get
wrote
the
it there.
same
It's gonna be
question.
a huge pool of questions. So good
That's how
luck.
A+ is.
Yeah, so that way you don't like just try to
Cheat.
guess and guess and guess and.
Right. So you should try, you should attempt it, but ultimately the points are given to you based on your completion. But the employers, they wanted to know, like, which students are technically ready, like with the technical knowledge. So that's what we have to show for them. Like, these are the students that score above this range. We don't disclose your score, but we have to tell them like, how many of the students actually score above the range. And it gives me a good gauge on, which student needs what type of information for their job.
Could we do the test and then hit
No,
restart and
you
then go
do the
back? Or-
learn,
Okay,
you do
yeah,
the
okay.
learn mode and then the exam mode.
Okay, you can't. Okay.
Well, you
Okay.
should, because if you wanted to do the exam mode, then do the exam mode. But I suggest doing the learn
No,
mode
yeah.
because many of my students that passed the 25, remember the CIS25?
Mhm.
The highest score in CIS25 last year was 84.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
So I can, there had been people that the learning part, everybody score high, but the highest score. So that tells me like whether people will actually pass the A+ or not. And
Mhm.
a lot of people were scoring in the 70s, which doesn't give you a pass. You have to be higher than 80 to
Mhm.
pass. It used to be 75, but now it's 80.
Ouch.
Okay.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
after, if you wanted to do other module on practice lab, you can click that little sheet with the ribbon, and then it's
Mhm.
gonna take you to, I allow that on mine. So it's you can select like Security Plus and other modules so you can check it out. Like the exam module
That's
that you
cool.
can test. Okay.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna sign off. Seth, do you have any question for me? I know you're busy, so. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.